Hi everyone, this is Andrea Pulskamp. We'll get started in just a second here. I want to make sure that I'm fully recording this, and then we'll get going. So we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining the webinar around our School Climate Transformation Design Collaborative. My name is Andrea Pulskamp, and I serve as one of 2 state transformation specialists for the Department of Education, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that role looks like in just a moment. I have you all on, you're all unmuted, so if you can mute your side, that would be helpful. I feel like we have a small enough number of participants where we can, do some Q&A at the end via voice as opposed to via the chat feature. So just asking that you mute your end of the line if possible. So let me move forward here. So again, my name's Andrea Pulskamp. I am hoping to learn about who is on the call, and I think what would be easiest for me is if you could type in the chat box your name, your district and or school, and your role. That would be super helpful and help me capture who is in attendance. This webinar kind of came up short, relatively shortly, and didn't have a ton of time, so we're doing it via Zoom, and that would be, I think, the best way to capture folks. So thank you very much for being willing to do that. So I am going to talk a little bit more about the webinar, or the School Climate Transformation Design Collaborative. I'm going to give you a sense of why and how that came about, as well as talk about the next steps around that. So should you have any questions, or if you can't hear me, or if something's coming up, please feel free to unmute yourself and try to interrupt. But if possible, related to the content, it'd be great to save questions till the end. So as I noted, I am a state transformation specialist, and typically what that looks like in a state education agency, is it someone who, hello.
Aurora, Brian, Union City, Littleton.
Can folks hear me?
Okay.
Can folks hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry, I was getting some feedback. So folks who are on the webinar, can you please mute yourself? Thank you. So a state transformation specialist in a state education agency is someone who is working towards creating alignment within and across multiple systems and offices.
You mentioned whole child.
Can whoever's,
special emotional learning.
can everybody mute themselves? Actually, I'll try to mute some folks too. Thanks. So essentially what this looks like is working with various offices and people within a state education agency to find where there is, a lot of similarity in what's being sort of discussed, identify where it's fragmented, and try to work towards some alignment so that we're minimizing confusion and duplication across the field. The other state transformation specialist within the department focuses on low-performing schools. And as you may have picked up, I focus on school climate, primarily with mental health, social emotional learning, behavior supports, academic supports, sort of all entangled in that. And I think this visual here is a good representation of essentially what we are trying to do within the department. Many of these frameworks that are noted and included here are implemented within various districts across the state. Some of them are promoted by the Department of Ed. Some of them are promoted by within the same office at the Department of Ed. Some of them are more referenced at a national level. And so, you know, I think what our job is going to be is to make sense of a lot of this, because although it's not very evident from what you're seeing here, there is a lot of overlap in what we're talking about when we talk about school climate, mental health, whole child, positive behavior supports, and social emotional learning. And I haven't found a great term to encompass all of those, so you'll hear me kind of reference those, and I may skip one or the other because there's so many components that I think can go into it. But just know when I'm kind of talking about those content areas, it's kind of all encompassing of that. So in order to create some alignment, we applied for a school climate transformation grant. And I'm trying to go to my next slide here. I don't know why it's not doing it. Okay, there we go. So this grant is funded through the U.S. Department of Education, their Office of Healthy and Safe Schools. And we are seeing it at CDE as an opportunity to create greater coherence around those topics that I've noted. So while it's focused and it's named school climate, what I am starting to fully understand, and actually I'm hearing from the field every time I'm out in it, is that school climate is sort of the foundational piece to everything else, to mental health, to social emotional learning, to academics, to behavior supports. And so it's very much intertwined with these topics, and we're seeing it at the department as a greater opportunity to work to integrate those pieces. And we believe that integration will result in a few things. So first off, as I keep noting, increased alignment across multiple bodies of work. This is both within CDE and in the field. It will result in increased implementation of evidence-based practices. So there's definitely a lot out there. In terms of evidence-based practices, there's obviously some that have greater evidence, some that don't, and we hope to be able to hone in a little bit on sort of what the best approaches are and what the best evidence really notes. And then integration will also help us with improvement in climate-related outcomes for students. And while we're in the process of kind of identifying some of these with our research and evaluation partner, which is Colorado State University, what we have been talking a lot about, both internally and externally, is students' sense of belonging and how important that is, and students' connections and relationships to other students as well as to teachers, having that trusted adult. So a lot of it is around the connectedness piece, the engagement piece, feeling safe at school, whether that's physically safe, emotionally safe, identity safe, all of those pieces. So we're hoping that over a long period of time, we will have an impact there. It is very slow to turn slides, so my apologies. So there are 4 funded districts as a result of this grant. It started in about 2019. So we have Araba Flagler, and they're the lead district for 4 other districts on the Eastern Plains who applied. So they have an interesting model in how they approached applying for this grant. There's also Center School District, which is in the San Luis Valley, Mesa County 51 on the western slope, and then Weld County RE5J in Weld County, obviously. And really, these districts are going to be spending the next 4 years not only helping to inform our approach to school climate and integration, but they are also going to be piloting implementation in depth, helping us develop a training and coaching model, and then that can then be scaled across the state. So that is really where we're heading. But in the meantime, we need some more voice from our district and school partners. We are very much aware that there are a lot of schools and districts who are making sense of all of the various frameworks, strategies, initiatives that CDE is putting on them, especially in regards to these topic areas. And we are hoping to really learn from that and then put forward a statewide approach that actually makes sense to districts and schools, and something that we can align around internally at CDE. So we are inviting district and school staff to apply to be a part of this collaborative. We are hoping that folks have extensive experience aligning these various frameworks and these various topics within their district. Additionally, in order to participate, folks need to be willing to complete research type activities in between meetings. And what that really looks like, so for example, in between the January and March meeting, we're going to be asking participants to create an action plan around an empathy research project. So really focusing on doing focus groups, interviews, looking at data, possibly doing surveys to get a sense for what the real problem is, where there's a lot of fragmentation, where there is momentum for supports around some of these, and what potential pitfalls there might be. Additionally, we're asking for folks to help pilot whatever we come up with in between the March and April meetings, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in just a moment. And then, of course, we are asking folks to commit to participating in the following in-person meetings: January 13th and 14th, March 4th and 5th, and April 30th. And as we sort of secure our group there, we will be able to determine, exactly where and share more information about those days. So it's not skipping quite as quickly as I would like. That's an interesting thing I'll have to note for Zoom. So some additional details around this work is that we are offering up to $20,000 in reimbursements for costs related to travel, meals, sub-pay. In addition, those costs are intended to sort of supplement with regards to the work that has to be completed in between meetings. So while this reimbursement will go directly to the district, it is intended to kind of help ease that extra work that we know you'll have to be doing in your district. I want to emphasize that this is not a grant. It is a reimbursement for costs. We will determine sort of the amount, I think, up front with the participating districts, depending on how many people participate, depending on how far away they are from the meeting sites. And so it won't be you won't have to be continuously submitting for reimbursement, but the amount that we set aside is going to be in consideration of those. And the other piece about this is, while there is an element, there's a little bit of competitiveness here in that we have about 10 to 15 additional slots for districts. At the same time, this is very different from the grant processes that we typically put out there. This is some intensive work for a 4-month period, and so therefore it is not going through our sort of typical processes. I also want to note that up to 3 people per district can participate. We definitely think having more than one person there is usually beneficial because there's always a little bit of a different perspective, but at the same time, that is not a requirement either. So recognizing that in a small district, somebody who has multiple roles certainly can't bring 3 people along. So I want that to be clear that that is not going to work against you in any way, but just wanting to put it out that up to 3 are eligible. So the way our meetings are going to be structured really centers on a design thinking approach. or a human-centered design process. And what that typically involves is co-creating. So we're actually going to be doing less here at CDE, at least initially, and really hoping to, capture the voice of the districts, so the end users of whatever approach we come up with. And so that is kind of the way we're thinking about it. And so for our January meeting, what we're going to be spending time doing is identifying the various frameworks and key components of those. So whether those are components related to the content, like social emotional learning, school safety, et cetera, we're also going to be identifying how so many of the processes associated with the various frameworks are very similar. So most have a component around data-driven decision-making and shared team leadership, those types of things. So kind of identifying those. Then we're going to learn how to conduct empathy and action research. So we are working with a design thinking contractor who is going to really help us lead this component. And then we're going to create our action plan for research between the January and March meetings. In March, we're going to share the data from the research that came up, and then develop insights around those. Those insights are going to inform 2 to 5 prototypes that we're going to be putting forward for testing in your districts. And then we'll also be developing a plan for testing those prototypes. In our April meeting, we're going to develop a second round of prototypes. In addition, we're going to create and compile the various artifacts that will surely come as a result of these really in-depth meetings that we anticipate will inform future work. So I can imagine that ideas around assessment, ideas around toolkits, tools that can be put forward will all be coming up, and we're going to make sure to capture those. And then we're going to plan next steps for implementation and scaling. So starting in the fall of 2020, we are going to begin implementing whatever we put forward and create here in our 4 districts. Additionally, there may be an opportunity for some piloting in other districts, but we'll have to see if that comes about. But I thought I might share that, because I could imagine that at least maybe for a second round of piloting, it might make sense to open it up a little bit more. But that's kind of, for this piece, the process that is going to be in place. So to indicate interest, we are asking folks to complete a WUFU form by December 20th. So it's kind of a short time frame. At the same time, though, this form really serves as a very short application for folks, and helps us narrow in a little bit on participation. And then notification of your participation will be sent by December 27th. So also a quick turnaround on our end. And I'm just going to show you quickly what is in that form. So we're creating or capturing some basic information. And then we're asking for folks to confirm that they can attend all meetings. Also confirm that they are willing to do work in between the 2 meetings. Funding will be conditional upon that. Then we have a piece around identifying the various frameworks or models being implemented. And then we have just a few narrative questions that you can see. There's one that's 500 words or less, and then the rest are 200 words or less. And it's really just to get a sense of kind of what you're doing in your district related to these areas. We are not, I really want to emphasize that I don't think this needs to be a formal grant writing process. Feel free to just list, bullet, describe in whatever way makes sense your responses to these questions. We're just trying to get a sense of what you're implementing, how you're making sense of it, how you're helping others within your district make sense of it, whether it's part of a UIP. If it's not, that's not a problem, just wanting to get a sense of where folks are. And then, where you might, what suggestions you have for improvement around this. So as I noted, That is going to be due December 20th. So I think, that pretty much wraps up what I was going to cover. I can imagine that there are probably some questions out there. I've seen a lot more folks come in, but I still think we have a manageable number of participants. So if folks want to unmute themselves and put forward a question, I'm happy to take those. Additionally, if folks want to put it in the chat box, if that's somehow easier, I'm happy to do that as well. I'm kind of scrolling through to see if there happen to be any that came through.
Andrea?
Yes.
This is Kimberly Kaplan at Charter School Institute.
Hi there.
Hi. I did actually have a couple questions.
Sure.
You said that the form that we would be filling out is really just give you a picture of what processes and different frameworks we're currently utilizing and kind of the depth to which we're doing that and the insight we have that would help the collaborative. I'm wondering, when I look at the number of applicants here or people potentially interested, do you guys have a rubric of any sort that you're going to use to make decisions about who you select for the collaborative, if there are more than the 10 to 15 that you're wanting to get?
That's a great question. We do not. I think I'm going to be pulling together a few different folks who lead implementation of some of these various frameworks, and we're going to be chatting about it. But we, again, don't have a formal process. This has not become a formal, it's not a formal process. So I think it's going to be a lot based on, where we're seeing strengths in some of those questions.
Okay, and then just as a charter school person, I noticed that you reference in the slides as well as in the form that it can be districts and or charter schools.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that a single charter school, for example, like a K-12 standalone charter, would have a shot at participating, or do you think it really would make more sense for a network of charters or a group of charters to get together and try to collaborate and represent the charter world?
That's a great question. In talking more with folks internally, we think, if possible, creating a little bit of a collaborative might make sense. The way we're thinking about it is, we would imagine that districts would possibly identify folks from a particular school who are doing things particularly well to participate. That said, though, I can imagine and I can think of examples of schools that have done this very well. It may mean that there's not going to be as much reimbursement at that point, and that's partly what we're also hoping to see. So if we have 15 people register or apply, I use that with air quotes, but and they're only going to bring one person, then that allows an opportunity to allow more in. So I think that's partly what we're also going to be looking at. Does that help?
That definitely helps. I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Mm-hmm. So I am reading some questions in the chat feature. So can we participate without reimbursement requests? What I'm thinking that means is, if you want to forego the stipend, can you still participate? And I would say yes. That is not a requirement. Like, the accepting of money is not necessarily a requirement. And then a question about, can a portion of the 20K be used for stipends to pay those completing the work? Yes. That said, though, we cannot issue a check to those individuals. We would have to be doing it to the district. So if the district then wants to put forward stipends, that's okay. But from our standpoint, with this federal funding, we can't sort of pay individual stipends directly. And then who is the design thinking contractor? So we are going to be using an organization called Leadership and Design. And some of you may know the person there. It's Tara Jan, formerly of the Colorado Education Initiative. She is going to be leading the design thinking piece. What other questions are out there?
Andrea, what do you imagine the time commitment to be, just kind of between meetings and the work in between?
Sure thing. So with the meetings, the first meeting is a day and a half. That's going to be about 12 hours plus
And
travel.
Okay, and they will all be in person?
They all will be in person. I think that is definitely kind of the sticky part there. But in order to do this design thinking work, it's very hard to do virtually.
I would imagine that. So I mean, and do you have the dates already published? I came a little bit late on the webinar.
Yes. Let me go back and I can kind of show you. Let me see if I have a way to go back.
My apologies.
No, you're fine. Not a problem. So in addition to these dates, so 1.5 days for January and March, and then 1 day for April, we anticipate there being about 10 to 20 hours of work in between meetings, and that is split over the number of people. So like one person we wouldn't expect them to do 20 hours worth of work. And it could be even a little bit less than that. I mean, we have to think through, so part of it is going to be action planning around the empathy research. We want to make sure that it's thorough, but you could do a thorough research project that theoretically could take less time than 10 hours, for example. But that's generally what we're thinking.
Okay.
Okay, so the meetings, the first meeting is in the Denver area. The second meeting in March is going to be in the Colorado Springs area, and the April meeting is going to be, I have North Metro on here, but I'm thinking probably in the Weld, Greeley, Fort Collins area. And I know it's still all on the Front Range, and I recognize that that's a challenge, but also with a contractor, and we have certain funding restraints and can't quite pay for that level of travel around for that person. So, trying to at least get to north, middle, and south parts of the state. Let's see, what might a successful prototype look like? I actually hesitate to answer that question because I have a lot of ideas. But I don't necessarily want to put forward my ideas because I really want to hear from districts. What I can say is that I imagine that we are coming up with some sort of aligned visual for a framework that sort of encaptures all of this without creating something new. That is not necessarily what we want to do, I don't think. But I would imagine that if we could come up with something that sort of makes sense of how all of these work together, or where we see similarities, such as the processes I was kind of talking about, where so many of these frameworks have the same 5 or 6 steps in order to work toward improvement and sort of revisit when it's not working and that type of thing. And so I would imagine that so we would come up with something like that. And then in addition to that, we would start talking about what successful implementation could look like. So I know that's not super helpful, but I don't want to skew anything unnecessarily. I really want the districts to be able to note that. So beyond implementation in the 4 districts next fall, the gain for districts to participate is learning from one another. I would say the gain for districts is, there's a couple pieces, and thank you for raising that, because I don't think that's necessarily clear. So I think first off is an opportunity to inform our state approach to school climate and all of these components. And I think why that's an opportunity is because ultimately whatever folks decide on here is what CDE is going to start working internally to streamline around. I think the second, so yeah, we're asking for your help for our benefit. That is for sure. At the same time, that's sort of going to be turned back out to districts, and I think there's a real opportunity to inform what that looks like. The second piece really is, while it can seem like a lot of money to some and not so much to others, the 20,000 we're hoping is helpful enough to kind of get folks there, recognizing that taking time away from your buildings is always difficult, and there's so much of that we ask for, but that is the hope that can help ease a little bit of that. And then I think the other piece, the other benefit, is absolutely learning from one another. There are lots of districts doing this well. There are so many different ways to think about implementation of multiple frameworks, et cetera, that I think absolutely there's an opportunity to learn from one another. And so that's kind of what I would note as the benefits overall. And taking aspects of the prototype framework back to our district. So I think I may not fully understand the question, but I think the benefits to that is for the districts, for other people in your district to weigh in around what is being put forward. So what maybe is unclear, or what feels super relevant, or what do we need to explore more because it's it just seems way more complicated and hard when we think about implementation. So I think that's what we're hoping to learn with the prototype testing following the March meeting. Do folks have other questions? Okay, well, I will say that should you have any additional questions, I am available via email and can definitely speak by phone. Want to provide as much support as I can with regards to this, so please feel free to reach out anytime. Additionally, we have more information on our school climate webpage, including the links to the form. This webinar will also be posted there. The dates and locations as I secure those will be posted there, so please feel free to check that out. And I'll just end by saying I hope you all have a great day, and thank you so much for your interest. Feel free to reach out, and happy holidays. Thank you.